My name is Scarlett, and I thought my parents loved me unconditionally until my stepsister framed me for stealing $50,000 from our family business. Within 24 hours, I went from being the golden child to being completely disowned and thrown out onto the street with nothing but the clothes on my back. They chose her word over mine without even asking for my side of the story. What they did not know was that I had been secretly recording every conversation in that house for months, and what I discovered would destroy everything they thought they knew about their precious stepdaughter. Before we dive into this family revenge story that will leave you speechless, I would love to know where you are watching from. Drop your location in the comments below, and do not forget to hit that like button if you are ready for some serious family karma. Subscribe because this story has more twists than a roller coaster. And trust me, you will not want to miss what happens when the truth finally comes out. Let me take you back to where this nightmare began. I was 26 years old, working as the financial coordinator for our family construction business that my father had built from the ground up over 30 years. My mother had remarried when I was 15, bringing along her new stepdaughter Madison, who was 2 years younger than me. For 11 years, I had tried everything to build a relationship with her, but Madison always seemed to resent my existence. The business was thriving, and I took pride in managing our accounts with meticulous attention to detail. Every transaction was documented, every expense justified, and every penny accounted for. My father trusted me completely with the financial operations, and I had never given him any reason to doubt my integrity. Madison worked in our marketing department, though her contributions were minimal at best. She spent most of her time on social media, posting glamorous photos while claiming to be building our brand presence. 3 months before everything exploded, I started noticing discrepancies in our accounts. Small amounts at first, a few $100s here and there that did not match our expense reports. My methodical nature made me dig deeper, and what I found made my blood run cold. Someone had been systematically transferring money from our business account to a personal account that I did not recognize. The transfers were always made during lunch hours when most of the staff was away, and they were cleverly disguised as payments to legitimate vendors. I spent weeks tracking down every suspicious transaction, cross-referencing timestamps with security footage from our office building. That was when I discovered something that changed everything. The security cameras clearly showed Madison entering the office during lunch breaks when she was supposed to be out with friends. More damning was the fact that every suspicious transaction occurred within 30 minutes of her visits to the office. But Madison was smarter than I had given her credit for. She had been setting up the perfect frame job for months. Using her access to the marketing computer, she had been creating fake vendor invoices and authorization emails that appeared to come from my work account. She even went as far as opening a bank account using a variation of a legitimate vendor's name, making the transfers look completely normal to anyone who was not paying close attention. The most devastating part was discovering that Madison had been planning to pin everything on me from the beginning. She had been saving screenshots of every transaction, building a narrative that I was the one with access to the accounts and the knowledge to pull off such sophisticated embezzlement. She had even been subtly mentioning to my parents how stressed I seemed lately, how I had been working late hours, and how I had been secretive about my personal finances. When I tried to present my findings to my father, Madison struck first. She went to my parents with crocodile tears, claiming she had discovered my supposed theft and was heartbroken to have to expose her own stepsister. She presented them with all the evidence she had fabricated, painting herself as the reluctant whistleblower who was only doing what was right for the family business. My parents called me into a family meeting that felt more like a tribunal. They sat across from me with expressions of disappointment and betrayal that I had never seen before. Madison was there too, playing the role of the concerned family member who was devastated by my supposed actions. When they accused me of stealing $50,000, I was so shocked that I could barely form coherent sentences. I tried to explain about my investigation about the security footage about the fake vendor accounts, but they had already made up their minds. Madison had gotten to them first with her perfectly crafted lie, and my desperate explanations sounded like the frantic excuses of someone who had been caught red-handed. The fact that I had been investigating the discrepancies for weeks without telling them made me look even more guilty in their eyes. The betrayal was not just about the money or the false accusations. It was about the fact that my own parents, who had raised me and claimed to know my character, chose to believe someone else over me without even conducting a proper investigation. They demanded that I return the stolen money immediately, and when I insisted that I had not taken anything, they gave me an ultimatum: confess and face the legal consequences, or get out of their house and never come back. I chose to leave with my dignity intact rather than confess to something I had not done. Within 24 hours, I had lost my family, my job, my home, and my entire support system. Madison had succeeded in destroying my life with surgical precision. And the worst part was that my parents thanked her for her courage in exposing me. The first few weeks after being disowned were the darkest of my life. I crashed on my college friend Rebecca's couch, surviving on my savings and trying to process the magnitude of what had happened. But anger is a powerful motivator, and I refused to let Madison destroy my life without fighting back. I knew the truth, and I was determined to prove my innocence no matter how long it took. My first breakthrough came from an unexpected source. While cleaning out my belongings from the family business, I had managed to discreetly copy security footage from the past 6 months onto a personal drive. I spent countless hours analyzing every frame, documenting Madison's suspicious activities with timestamps and detailed notes. But I needed more than just security footage to prove my case. I decided to do something that would later save my entire case. I filed a formal police report for identity theft and fraud. The detective assigned to my case, Maria Gonzalez, was a sharp woman in her 40s who specialized in white-collar crimes. She listened to my story with professional skepticism, but when I presented her with the security footage and my detailed analysis of the financial discrepancies, her demeanor changed completely. Detective Gonzalez helped me understand that this was not just a family dispute, but a serious criminal case involving sophisticated fraud. She obtained warrants to examine all the bank records associated with the fake vendor accounts, and what we discovered was even more damaging than I had imagined. Madison had not just stolen $50,000. She had been embezzling money for over 8 months, with the total amount exceeding $120,000. The bank records revealed a pattern of calculated theft that went far beyond opportunistic crime. Madison had been researching our vendors, studying their invoicing patterns, and creating fake accounts that were sophisticated enough to fool casual inspection. She had even been paying taxes on the stolen money to make her personal account look legitimate, showing a level of premeditation that demonstrated this was not a crime of passion, but a carefully planned scheme. But the most shocking discovery came when Detective Gonzalez traced the IP addresses of the emails used to authorize the fraudulent transactions. Every single authorization email had been sent from Madison's personal laptop, not from my work computer as she had claimed. The digital forensics evidence was irrefutable. There was a complete digital trail proving that Madison had orchestrated every aspect of the embezzlement scheme. Armed with this evidence, I made the decision to confront my parents one more time. I called my father and requested a meeting, telling him that I had new information about the theft that they needed to hear. He was reluctant to see me, but something in my voice must have convinced him that this was important. The meeting took place at a coffee shop downtown Neutral Territory, where I hoped emotions would not run as high as they had during our last encounter. My parents arrived looking older and more worn than I remembered, and I could see that the stress of the situation had taken its toll on them as well. Madison was notably absent from this meeting, which I had specifically requested. I presented them with everything: the security footage showing Madison's unauthorized office visits, the bank records proving the fake vendor accounts, the IP address evidence linking the authorization emails to her personal computer, and the police report documenting the full scope of her crimes. I watched their faces change as the weight of the evidence became undeniable. My father's reaction was a mixture of shock, anger, and devastating realization. He kept saying, "This cannot be right," and "there must be some mistake." But the evidence was overwhelming. My mother sat in stunned silence, tears streaming down her face as she realized the magnitude of what Madison had done, not just to the business, but to our family. The most heartbreaking moment was when my mother finally spoke. She looked at me with eyes full of regret and said, "We should have listened to you. We should have investigated before making any accusations. We failed you as parents, and I do not know how we can ever make this right." But I was not ready for reconciliation yet. The betrayal was too deep, and the damage to my life too severe for simple apologies to fix everything. I told them that I appreciated their acknowledgement of the truth, but that I needed time to decide what kind of relationship we could have moving forward. First, I wanted to see Madison face the consequences of her actions. My father immediately called Madison to demand an emergency family meeting. When she arrived at the coffee shop 30 minutes later, she still had that same smug confidence that had infuriated me for months. She clearly expected this to be another session where my parents reinforced their support for her and their disappointment in me. The look on Madison's face when my father laid out all the evidence was something I will never forget. She went through the classic stages of denial, anger bargaining, and finally desperate excuses. She claimed that she had only borrowed the money and was planning to pay it back. She insisted that she had been framed, that someone else must have used her computer and created those accounts. She even tried to suggest that I had somehow fabricated all the evidence as part of an elaborate revenge scheme. But the evidence was too solid, and Detective Gonzalez had already verified its authenticity through independent forensic analysis. Madison's lies crumbled under the weight of irrefutable proof, and she was forced to confront the reality that her carefully constructed deception had been completely exposed. The revelation of Madison's guilt created an immediate crisis within our family that went far beyond the original theft. My parents were devastated not only by the financial loss, but by the realization that they had been manipulated into destroying their relationship with their own daughter. Madison, faced with overwhelming evidence, finally admitted to the embezzlement but showed no genuine remorse for the pain she had caused. What happened next revealed the true depth of Madison's character and her willingness to escalate the situation, rather than accept responsibility for her actions. Instead of quietly accepting the consequences and trying to make amends, she launched a vicious campaign to discredit me and minimize her own culpability. She began spreading rumors throughout our small business community that I was vindictive and unstable, claiming that I was trying to destroy her life out of jealousy and sibling rivalry. Madison's strategy was particularly insidious because she mixed partial truths with outright lies. She admitted to taking some money, but claimed it was much less than the evidence showed, and she insisted that I had been planning to embezzle funds myself before she discovered the discrepancies. She even suggested that my detailed investigation was evidence of my own criminal intent, arguing that only someone planning a crime would know so much about how to manipulate financial systems. The situation became even more complex when Madison's biological father, Richard, entered the picture. He had been largely absent from her life since my mother's remarriage, but the threat of criminal charges brought him back with a vengeance. Richard was a successful attorney who specialized in corporate law, and he immediately began working to minimize Madison's legal exposure while maximizing the damage to my reputation. Richard's first move was to threaten my parents with a custody and visitation lawsuit, claiming that they had created a hostile environment for Madison and had unfairly favored me throughout the marriage. This was particularly painful for my mother, who had spent 11 years trying to blend our families and create a loving home for both daughters. The thought of losing all contact with Madison despite her crimes was devastating for my mother. But Richard's most dangerous strategy was his attempt to turn the embezzlement case into a civil family dispute rather than a criminal matter. He argued that since this was a family business and no outside parties had been harmed, the situation should be resolved through private mediation rather than through the criminal justice system. He even suggested that pressing criminal charges against Madison would damage the family business's reputation and potentially destroy everything my father had worked to build. This pressure campaign initially had some effect on my parents, who were already struggling with guilt over their treatment of me, and fear of losing Madison entirely. They began suggesting that maybe we could handle this as a family matter, with Madison paying back the stolen money and agreeing to counseling or some other form of rehabilitation. But I had learned valuable lessons from Detective Gonzalez about the importance of holding criminals accountable for their actions. She explained that sophisticated financial crimes like Madison's rarely happen in isolation, and that failing to pursue criminal charges would send a message that such behavior was acceptable as long as the perpetrator was family. More importantly, I realized that allowing Madison to escape meaningful consequences would only enable her to commit similar crimes in the future. This was when I began building a network of allies who understood the importance of justice and accountability. Detective Gonzalez became my primary advocate within the criminal justice system, helping me navigate the complex process of filing formal charges and ensuring that the investigation was conducted thoroughly and professionally. She also connected me with prosecutors who specialized in white-collar crimes and understood the psychological patterns of financial predators. My second crucial ally was Patricia Williams, a forensic accountant who specialized in family business fraud. Patricia had been recommended by Detective Gonzalez, and she helped me understand the full scope of Madison's crimes beyond just the obvious embezzlement. Her analysis revealed that Madison had also been manipulating expense reports, creating fake business trips, and even charging personal expenses to company credit cards. The total amount of her theft was actually closer to $150,000, not the $50,000 that had initially been discovered. Patricia's expertise was invaluable because she could explain the financial evidence in terms that prosecutors, judges, and juries could easily understand. She created detailed charts and timelines that showed exactly how Madison had executed her scheme, making it impossible for Richard to claim that this was just a misunderstanding or a case of poor record-keeping. My third important ally came from an unexpected source, David Kim, a former employee of our construction company who had been fired 6 months earlier. David reached out to me after hearing about the embezzlement investigation through mutual connections in the industry. He had always suspected that something was wrong with the company's finances during his time there, but he had never been able to prove anything. David revealed that Madison had tried to recruit him into her embezzlement scheme by suggesting that they could blame any missing money on accounting errors or vendor disputes. When he refused to participate and threatened to report her suspicions to my father, Madison had convinced my parents that David was unreliable and potentially dishonest. She had orchestrated his firing to eliminate him as a threat to her scheme. David's testimony was crucial because it established a pattern of criminal behavior and showed that Madison was willing to destroy innocent people's careers to protect her theft operation. It also demonstrated that her crimes were not impulsive mistakes, but calculated attacks on anyone who threatened to expose her. With this alliance of professional investigators, forensic experts, and credible witnesses, I felt confident that we could build an unshakable case against Madison. But Richard was not giving up without a fight, and he began employing increasingly desperate tactics to protect his daughter from the consequences of her actions. The pressure intensified when Richard threatened to sue me personally for defamation and harassment, claiming that my investigation had damaged Madison's mental health and career prospects. He also began pressuring my parents to fire me permanently from the family business and to publicly state that they supported Madison's version of events. This created an impossible situation for my parents, who were caught between their guilt over their treatment of me, their complicated love for Madison, and their fear of legal and financial consequences from Richard's threats. The stress was destroying their marriage and their health, and I could see that they were desperate for some resolution that would allow them to salvage relationships with both daughters. It was during this period of maximum pressure that I made a decision that would ultimately determine the outcome of the entire case. Instead of backing down or agreeing to a private settlement, I decided to escalate the situation by going public with Madison's crimes and the evidence against her. I was done being the victim in this story, and I was ready to fight for justice no matter what the personal cost might be. Going public with Madison's crimes seemed like the right strategy until everything fell apart in the most devastating way possible. I had decided to share our story with a local business journalist who specialized in corporate fraud cases, believing that public pressure would force the authorities to take the case more seriously and prevent Richard from burying the truth through legal maneuvering. The journalist Michael Torres had seemed genuinely interested in the story and impressed by the quality of evidence we had assembled. He spent 3 weeks interviewing me, Detective Gonzalez Patricia Williams, and David Kim, building what appeared to be a comprehensive exposé of Madison's crimes and the failure of the initial investigation. He even obtained additional security footage from nearby businesses that corroborated our timeline of events. But what I did not know was that Richard had been working behind the scenes to neutralize the biggest threat to Madison's defense. He had discovered that David Kim was facing serious financial difficulties due to his unemployment and outstanding legal bills from an unrelated lawsuit. Richard approached David with an offer that would solve all his money problems in exchange for changing his testimony about Madison's crimes. The betrayal came just days before the article was scheduled to publish. David called me with what he claimed was urgent information about the case, asking to meet at a restaurant downtown. When I arrived, he seemed nervous and agitated, constantly checking his phone and avoiding eye contact. He told me that he had been thinking more about his interactions with Madison, and that he was no longer certain about some of the details he had previously shared. At first, I thought David was just experiencing normal pre-trial anxiety about testifying in a criminal case. Many witnesses get nervous when they realize their testimony could send someone to prison. But as the conversation continued, it became clear that something much more serious was happening. David began walking back key elements of his story, claiming that he might have misunderstood Madison's suggestions about manipulating financial records. The devastating blow came when David admitted that he had already spoken with Michael Torres and provided a revised statement that contradicted his original testimony. He claimed that Madison had never actually asked him to participate in embezzlement, and that their conversations about financial irregularities had been theoretical discussions rather than concrete criminal planning. He even suggested that his original accusations might have been influenced by his anger over being fired from the company. I was stunned by this complete reversal, but worse was yet to come. David revealed that Richard had convinced him that testifying against Madison would expose him to potential criminal charges as an accessory to embezzlement, even though he had never actually participated in any crimes. The fear of prosecution combined with Richard's generous financial offer had been enough to flip David from ally to adversary. The impact of David's betrayal was immediate and catastrophic. Michael Torres called me the next morning to inform me that he was pulling the article due to concerns about the credibility of our key witness. Without David's testimony about Madison's recruitment attempts and pattern of criminal behavior, the story was reduced to a simple family dispute over missing money. Torres explained that his editor was unwilling to risk a defamation lawsuit when one of the primary sources had recanted his statements. But the damage went beyond just losing media coverage. Detective Gonzalez called me later that day with even worse news. The prosecutor's office was reconsidering the criminal charges against Madison because David's recantation had undermined the pattern of behavior they needed to prove criminal intent. Without evidence that Madison had attempted to recruit accomplices, it became much harder to demonstrate that her actions were premeditated crimes rather than opportunistic mistakes. The psychological impact of David's betrayal was almost worse than the legal consequences. I had trusted him with the most important fight of my life, and he had sold me out for money just when I needed him most. The feeling of isolation was overwhelming. Not only had my own family abandoned me, but now someone I had counted on as an ally had chosen Madison's side when the pressure got intense. Madison and Richard immediately went on the offensive, using David's recantation as proof that I had been lying about the extent of Madison's crimes. They claimed that I had pressured David into making false accusations, and that his revised testimony revealed the truth about my vindictive character. Richard even filed a formal complaint with the Bar Association against Detective Gonzalez, claiming that she had conducted a biased investigation based on my fabricated evidence. My parents were devastated by this turn of events. They had finally begun to believe in my innocence and were preparing to support me through the criminal trial. But David's betrayal created new doubts about everything we thought we had proven. My mother called me in tears, saying that she did not know what to believe anymore, and asking whether I had somehow manipulated David into lying for me initially. The worst part was that I began to doubt myself and wonder whether I was fighting a battle that could not be won. Madison had demonstrated a level of strategic thinking and ruthlessness that I had underestimated, and Richard's legal expertise was proving more effective than I had anticipated. With my key witness compromised and my media strategy in ruins, it seemed like Madison might actually escape accountability for her crimes. But just when everything seemed hopeless, Patricia Williams called me with news that would change the entire trajectory of the case. She had been continuing her forensic analysis independently, and she had discovered something that would prove Madison's guilt beyond any reasonable doubt, regardless of what David Kim said or did not say. Patricia Williams had always been thorough in her forensic accounting work, but what she discovered during her continued investigation went far beyond anything we had previously uncovered. While David Kim's betrayal had damaged our case in the short term, Patricia's methodical analysis of digital records was about to provide unshakable evidence that would make witness testimony almost irrelevant. The breakthrough came from Patricia's examination of metadata from the fraudulent authorization emails that Madison had sent using her personal laptop. While we had already proven that the emails came from Madison's IP address, Patricia discovered something much more damning. The emails contained hidden tracking pixels that automatically recorded when they were opened and from what location they were accessed. This digital forensic evidence revealed that Madison had been monitoring the fraudulent transactions in real time, checking the emails multiple times per day from various locations to ensure that the transfers were being processed successfully. The tracking data created an irrefutable timeline showing that Madison was actively managing her embezzlement scheme rather than simply making impulsive financial decisions. But Patricia's most significant discovery came from analyzing the fake vendor bank accounts that Madison had created. Using her connections in the banking industry, Patricia obtained detailed transaction histories that revealed Madison had been using the stolen money for luxury purchases that she had been hiding from her family. The records showed payments to high-end jewelry stores, exclusive spas, designer clothing boutiques, and even a down payment on a sports car that she had registered under a false name. What made these discoveries so powerful was that they directly contradicted Madison's claims that she had only borrowed the money temporarily and was planning to pay it back. The evidence showed a systematic pattern of theft and personal enrichment that had been ongoing for months with no indication that Madison had any intention of returning the stolen funds. Patricia also uncovered something that explained why Madison had been so confident in her ability to frame me for the crimes. Madison had been secretly recording our family business meetings for months, collecting audio clips of me discussing financial procedures and vendor relationships. She had planned to use these recordings to support her claim that I was the only person with enough knowledge to execute the embezzlement scheme. However, Madison's plan backfired because the recordings actually provided additional evidence of her guilt. Patricia's analysis of the audio files revealed that Madison had been asking suspiciously specific questions about our banking procedures and vendor authorization processes, clearly gathering information she would need to commit financial fraud. The timestamps on the recordings corresponded perfectly with the timeline of the embezzlement scheme. Armed with this new evidence, Patricia recommended that we reach out to a specialist in digital forensics who could provide expert testimony about the technical aspects of the case. This was when we were introduced to Dr. Sarah Martinez, a cybersecurity expert who had testified in dozens of white-collar crime cases and had an impeccable reputation for explaining complex technical evidence to juries. Dr. Martinez reviewed all of Patricia's findings and conducted her own independent analysis of the digital evidence. What she discovered was even more damaging to Madison's case. The fake vendor accounts had been created using sophisticated identity theft techniques that required significant planning and technical knowledge. Madison had stolen the identities of legitimate business owners to create the fraudulent accounts, adding federal identity theft charges to her potential criminal liability. Dr. Martinez also discovered that Madison had been using anonymous proxy servers and cryptocurrency exchanges to launder some of the stolen money, attempting to make it untraceable. This level of sophistication proved that Madison's crimes were not simple family business disputes, but serious federal offenses that fell under the jurisdiction of multiple law enforcement agencies. The combination of Patricia's forensic accounting and Dr. Martinez's digital forensics expertise created a case that was absolutely bulletproof. Even without David Kim's testimony, we now had enough evidence to prove every element of Madison's crimes beyond reasonable doubt. The technical evidence was objective and could not be influenced by witness intimidation or financial pressure from Richard. Detective Gonzalez was amazed by the quality and quantity of evidence that Patricia and Dr. Martinez had assembled. She immediately contacted the FBI's white-collar crime unit and the Postal Inspector's office, since Madison's scheme had involved mail fraud and wire fraud across state lines. The case was quickly escalated from a local embezzlement investigation to a federal criminal prosecution. The federal authorities were particularly interested in Madison's identity theft activities, which had affected multiple victims beyond just our family business. Dr. Martinez's analysis revealed that Madison had stolen personal information from at least 6 different business owners to create her network of fake vendor accounts. Each identity theft was a separate federal felony, carrying potential sentences of several years in prison. With federal law enforcement involved, Richard's influence as a local attorney became much less significant. The federal prosecutors were not impressed by his threats and legal maneuvering, and they made it clear that they intended to pursue the case aggressively, regardless of any family considerations. The technical evidence was so strong that they believed Madison would ultimately be forced to accept a plea agreement rather than risk a trial. The psychological impact on Madison was immediate and obvious. She had been confident that David Kim's betrayal would end the criminal case against her, but the emergence of irrefutable digital evidence left her with no viable defense strategy. Richard began desperately searching for plea bargain options, but the federal charges carried mandatory minimum sentences that limited their negotiating power. My parents were both relieved and horrified by these developments. They were glad that my innocence was finally being proven conclusively, but they were devastated by the realization that Madison's crimes were far more extensive and serious than anyone had imagined. The woman they had defended and supported had not only stolen from our family business, but had victimized multiple innocent people through identity theft. The most satisfying moment came when Madison was forced to admit publicly that all of her accusations against me had been lies designed to cover up her own criminal activities. In a brief statement prepared by Richard's law firm, Madison acknowledged that I had never been involved in any financial improprieties, and that she deeply regretted the pain her false accusations had caused our family. But this acknowledgement was too little too late. The damage to our family relationships had already been done, and simple apologies could not undo months of betrayal and false accusations. I was finally vindicated, but I was not ready to forgive the people who had abandoned me when I needed them most. The federal case against Madison moved forward with the efficiency and thoroughness that only comes with overwhelming evidence and motivated prosecutors. Within 6 weeks of the FBI taking over the investigation, Madison was indicted on 17 separate felony charges, including wire fraud, mail fraud, identity theft, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes. The potential sentence was 45 years in federal prison, though Richard continued to pursue plea negotiations that might reduce her exposure. The moment of ultimate justice came during Madison's arraignment hearing, when she was forced to stand before a federal judge and hear the full scope of her crimes read aloud in open court. I attended the hearing with Patricia Williams and Dr. Martinez, watching as Madison's facade of confidence finally cracked under the weight of her legal reality. She could no longer pretend that this was a simple family dispute, or that she was the victim of my vindictive accusations. The ripple effects of Madison's exposure extended far beyond our immediate family. The local business community was shocked to learn about the sophisticated nature of her crimes, and several of our competitors publicly apologized for believing the rumors that Madison and Richard had spread about my character. The construction company's reputation was actually enhanced by the revelation that we had cooperated fully with law enforcement and implemented new financial controls to prevent future fraud. My relationship with my parents required much more time and effort to repair. While they had finally acknowledged my innocence and expressed deep regret for their treatment of me, I was not ready to simply forgive and forget. I insisted that they undergo family counseling to address the underlying issues that had made them so willing to believe Madison's lies and abandon their own daughter without conducting a proper investigation. The counseling sessions were difficult and emotional, but they were necessary for any hope of rebuilding trust. My parents had to confront the fact that they had shown favoritism toward Madison throughout their marriage, always giving her the benefit of the doubt while holding me to higher standards. They also had to acknowledge that their fear of conflict had made them avoid addressing Madison's problematic behavior over the years, enabling her to escalate from minor dishonesty to serious criminal activity. My mother struggled particularly hard with guilt over the way our family dynamics had developed. She admitted that she had been so focused on making Madison feel welcome and loved that she had sometimes overlooked my needs and feelings. She also revealed that Richard had been pressuring her for years to choose between her loyalty to me and her relationship with Madison, creating an impossible situation that she had never known how to navigate properly. My father's journey toward understanding was different, but equally important. As a successful businessman, he was humiliated by the fact that he had been so completely deceived by Madison's financial manipulations. He had to confront the reality that his emotional attachment to his stepdaughter had compromised his professional judgment and put his entire company at risk. The experience forced him to implement new oversight procedures and internal controls that would prevent any single employee from having the access that Madison had abused. The healing process was gradual and sometimes frustrating, but it was also transformative for all of us. Through months of honest conversations and professional guidance, we began to rebuild our relationships on a foundation of mutual respect and clear boundaries, rather than the dysfunction and favoritism that had characterized our family for so many years. Meanwhile, Madison's legal situation continued to deteriorate as more evidence emerged about the full scope of her criminal activities. Patricia Williams discovered that Madison had also been embezzling money from 2 previous employers before joining our family business, establishing a clear pattern of financial predation that dated back several years. These additional victims came forward to testify about their experiences, further strengthening the federal case. Richard's attempts to negotiate a plea agreement were ultimately unsuccessful because Madison refused to accept responsibility for the full extent of her crimes. She continued to maintain that she was the victim of a family conspiracy and that the technical evidence had been fabricated to frame her. This delusional thinking made it impossible for prosecutors to offer any meaningful reduction in charges, since cooperation requires genuine acceptance of guilt. The trial lasted 3 weeks and provided a public forum for the complete exposure of Madison's crimes and lies. I testified about the impact of her false accusations on my life and career, while Patricia Williams and Dr. Martinez explained the technical evidence in terms that the jury could easily understand. The evidence was so overwhelming that Madison's defense attorney advised her to change her plea to guilty, but she refused and insisted on maintaining her innocence even after the jury began deliberations. The guilty verdict on all 17 counts was announced on a Friday afternoon in late spring, exactly 1 year after Madison had first accused me of theft. I was in the courtroom with my parents when the verdict was read, and we all wept with relief and satisfaction at finally seeing justice served. Madison showed no emotion as she was led away in handcuffs, still maintaining the same arrogant demeanor that had characterized her throughout the ordeal. The sentencing hearing 3 months later provided the final closure I needed. Madison was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation and full restitution of all stolen funds, plus penalties. The judge specifically noted that Madison's refusal to accept responsibility for her crimes and her attempts to destroy innocent family relationships had influenced the severity of the sentence. But the most meaningful outcome was not Madison's punishment, but the relationships I built and strengthened throughout this ordeal. Detective Gonzalez became a close friend who taught me about resilience and the importance of fighting for justice. Patricia Williams and Dr. Martinez became professional mentors who helped me develop new career opportunities in forensic accounting and financial consulting. Most importantly, I learned to value the family I chose rather than just the family I was born into. Rebecca, who had supported me from the very beginning, became like a sister to me. The professional relationships I developed became a network of people who respected my integrity and expertise rather than taking advantage of my loyalty and trust. My relationship with my parents eventually stabilized into something healthier and more honest than it had ever been before. We learned to communicate directly about problems instead of avoiding conflict, and we established clear boundaries about acceptable behavior and mutual respect. While we could never completely undo the pain of their betrayal, we were able to build something new and stronger from the wreckage of our old dysfunction. Looking back on this experience, I realized that Madison actually did me a favor by exposing the weaknesses in our family relationships and forcing me to develop independence and strength I never knew I possessed. The woman who tried to destroy my life ultimately gave me the opportunity to build a better life based on my own values and choices, rather than family obligations and expectations. This journey taught me that sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones who help us discover our true strength and resilience. Have you ever experienced a situation where someone's betrayal actually led to positive changes in your life? I would love to hear your stories about overcoming family drama and finding your chosen family in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to help others find these important discussions about family loyalty versus personal integrity. Do not forget to subscribe for more real-life stories about justice redemption and the power of standing up for yourself even when everyone else turns against you. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear that the truth always comes out eventually, and that sometimes losing toxic family members is actually a blessing in disguise. Thank you for joining me on this emotional journey, and remember that your worth is never determined by how others treat you, but by how courageously you stand up for what is right. Until next time, keep fighting for justice and surrounding yourself with people who truly value your authentic self.